After every Stelly talk, I don't smoke, but I feel like I need a cigarette because it's just like so intense. It's great. Unfortunately, I'm a little different than Stelly. I'm not less interesting. Oh, okay. I won't tell Stelly that, but not less interesting, hopefully, but definitely a little bit of a different tempo. And today, what we're really going to talk about, as we have some folks filtering in and filtering out here, is not quite SaaS pricing, but we're going to dig into SaaS in general, and really we're going to be talking about change. And in particular, what is happening within the SaaS market, what's happening in our SaaS ecosystem, and based on that particular change, how essentially the speed of the market that we're in right now, the speed of what things are happening as we build our SaaS businesses, are essentially setting us up for a lot of failure based on what we've been doing in the past. So I understand that's not as hoorah-rah as melting your face off with some really, really good sales tactics that Stelly brought us. But I think it's really, really important to dig into this, in particular in Europe, because we have such a good opportunity in Europe to basically not fall prey to a lot of the problems that have happened in the US and a lot of the stumbles that have happened in the US with building those particular businesses. Sound good? Want to dig in? Okay? No? If you guys aren't excited, I can't yell and drop a lot of F-bombs. And so, okay, Jesus. All right, cool. So just to give a little bit of background on why we have any authority to talk about this. So as Stelly mentioned, I'm Patrick Campbell. I'm the CEO and founder of Price Intelligently. And our company's evolved a lot over the past 5.5 years. We started off as a pricing software product where we basically helped SaaS and subscription companies with basically their pricing. And then we evolved into launching something called Profitwell, which is free subscription financial metrics that plugs right into your billing system. So you can plug in Zora, Stripe, Braintree, whatever you're using, and get free access to essentially all of your churn, all the other metrics that you need. And then we kind of evolved more into a platform as well, where we not only offer up those free metrics, but we also offer up these products that we charge for that actually help you with different areas of your business. So the idea that we're kind of changing our positioning up, and I like to kind of talk about, is that we're intensely focused on what's going on with SaaS unit economics, and then essentially building products that can kind of leverage the different SaaS unit economic findings that we find. But I'm not giving you this context to sell you. I'm really giving you this context because at this point, through Profitwell in particular, we're actually sitting on about 25% of the SaaS industry's financial data, which has given us a really, really unique perspective. And as we've continued to mine a lot of that data, we've come up with just some fascinating insights that we're going to share today that are hopefully going to help you in your businesses and make sure you're not making those particular mistakes. So to kind of dig right in, and there's a ton of data that we're going to go through. We're going to share the slides, we're going to share the data, so everyone's going to have access to this. But I would really focus on the story in particular and the narrative that we're talking about today. And the reason for that in particular is mainly because this is more of a call to arms to actually change what's happening in your business so you don't fall prey to what's happening within the particular market. So let's dig in by starting really, really high level. Right now, a lot of people think that SaaS, it's been around forever and that we're doing just so well within this particular ecosystem. And we definitely are. But what we miss out on a lot of times is the fact that we are still in SaaS's adolescence. If you really think about even just the marketing software space, and you look at 10 years ago, there were only less than 500 different marketing pieces of software out there. But today, marketing looks like this, right? We've potentially all seen this particular chart before. There are currently over 8,500 different just SaaS software products that are dedicated to marketing, that are dedicated to helping you acquire more customers. And this is really just because SaaS is a lot easier to build, right? It's definitely not easy, but if you're building a company 10 years ago, there were a lot of technological barriers that you had to get over, both from an infrastructure standpoint, but also just from an acquisition standpoint, that made it extremely difficult for you to build a successful business. Now, with the rise of infrastructure, the rise of AWS, the cloud, et cetera, now we can all, if we wanted to create brand new businesses by the end of the day today, we could spin up a server, spin up a landing page, and even start acquiring leads. Now, what's interesting about this from the perspective of your business is that what we're finding is that competition is now rampant. And what's fascinating about this in particular is that when we talk to founders and we talk to executives at SaaS companies, and we actually ask them how many competitors they actually had in their first year of business, what's interesting is that 5 years ago, when you were starting things off, you might have started out with just 3 competitors in your business. Today, you're a lot closer to about double digits. And even those folks who are 5 years old, when we talk to them, and we ask them how many competitors they have today, now everyone's looking at double digits. And what's interesting about this is not necessarily a problem within your business. This is actually a really, really cool opportunity, right? It's pushing what the software needs to be in order to be really, really successful. And the other piece that's actually really, really helping us is that sales and marketing channels are now plentiful. So who out here was building software or selling software, something like 10, 15 years ago? Okay, so these are the old guys and gals that you have to learn the war stories from here. But what's really, really interesting is that 10, 15 years ago, you didn't have a lot of channels, right? You didn't have a Facebook or a Google being created every single quarter. But we've seen this over the past few years where now all of a sudden we acquire B2B companies through Instagram, we can use Snapchat, we can use the traditional methods of Google, we can use Facebook, we can use all types of different things. And when we look at the actual data, 15 years ago, the average amount of marketing channels that people were exploiting was right around 2. Today, the average amount of marketing channels and sales channels that people are exploiting are in the double digits. But what's really fascinating about this graph in particular is that notice how it's leveling off a bit. And this is actually a big problem. We're not getting a Facebook or a Google every single year. All of a sudden, we're getting a lot of little micro channels or medium channels, which has a lot of bad implications on essentially the growth that we're seeing within different companies. And our customers, all of this innovation, all of this kind of acquisition innovation has really, really helped our customers from a lot of different perspectives. But the technological advancements that we've had within our software has actually helped them out a lot in terms of just getting up to speed. What we found in looking at about 890 companies here is that when you were implementing software 10 years ago, whether it was B2B or in some cases B2C software, it took a lot of time to get that software up and running. It took 56 hours just to make sure that you could start using the product. Now with the rise of SaaS, it takes about 7. That's amazing. For the old folks in the room who were selling software 10, 15 years ago, this was the biggest barrier to entry. It was basically like, oh, it's software, it's cool, but it's going to take forever to implement. Whereas today, we just take advantage of single sign-on, OAuthing in, all types of different things that allow us just to basically get up and running almost instantaneously. Now, what's interesting is there's also some amazing consequences of this. But there's also some not so amazing consequences, particularly when it comes to the things that you're facing within the market. In particular, CAC is steadily increasing over time. And we actually refreshed this data from some previous studies that we looked at, and we noticed that the trend is continuing. That customer that you might have acquired for about $10 5 years ago, you're currently paying $15 to $17 for that same particular customer, mainly because there's just so much density now within the content space. Everyone's using ebooks, everyone's using sales teams, everyone's using paid ads. There's just so many things that are hammering your customers basically to sign up for different types of products. And what's fascinating with what's happening in SaaS and just the technological advancements is that we're also seeing, unfortunately, that the relative value of features is declining. So to give you an anecdote, 15 years ago, there weren't even things like Salesforce integrations into other products. 3, 4, 5 years ago, you could sell a Salesforce integration for maybe $1,000 a month. But today, those same Salesforce integrations are essentially expected, or the value of those integrations and even the value of your core products are just declining because consumers are able to get so many different products out there, and ultimately there's just so much happening in the market because we're just building so many different things within our products. Now, what's also interesting about this in particular is that it has never been more amazing to be a consumer of software in the world. But consumers overall are extremely ungrateful. I don't know if it's millennials, I don't know what it is, but what's interesting is that NPS scores, on average, have decreased significantly. So you look at the average NPS here, and this is across B2B and B2C for about 1,700 companies here. NPS 5 years ago was about 34. That's because people were so grateful for basically solving a lot of their problems. But we've seen so much increase in SaaS that a year ago now, we've basically seen a 66 or 70% drop in essentially what's happening with NPS. So we're creating an amazing amount of software. We have reduced the time it takes, and we've made better and better improvements in the technology. But unfortunately, our consumers aren't really recognizing that, and they're also just getting hammered and hammered with all kinds of messaging to sign up for different software. Now, what's interesting is everything that's happening in the market is surmountable, right? If you have a really, really good product team, it doesn't matter how many competitors you have. If you have a really, really good growth team, something that you can kind of get over all that CAC inefficiency that's happening in the market. But what's unfortunate is that all data indicates that what we used to be doing and what we're continuing to do just unfortunately isn't working. So it used to be that our playbook was just acquire, acquire, acquire. I want to acquire as many customers as possible. And when we talked to founders, what we found is that we asked them if they were going to choose one lever within their business, what was the one thing that they were going to put all the eggs in their basket on? And 70% of them said they just wanted more logos. I just want to acquire, acquire, acquire more customers. People don't care how much it costs or how much money they're making per customer, and they definitely aren't caring about how long those customers are sticking around. But what's interesting is that in the context of that, we're also just not focusing on things like pricing. So what we found is that in most companies, they're actually spending less than 10 hours per year on their pricing strategy. And interestingly enough, this data is really, really skewed because the average amount of time a company will spend on their pricing in the entire history of their business is only 15 hours. And we looked at a little different data just on what people are spending their time on. And we actually found that on average, people are spending about 13 hours per year picking out their custodian supplies. So this begs the question, why are you spending more time picking out your toilet paper than on your pricing? Come on, give me a little bit there. No? Okay, there's a lot of dad jokes that I'm leaving out that I want to put back in, but we'll keep going here. So the other thing that's happening is a lot of us out there are letting kind of sales, unfortunately, ruin our jobs. That's not typically like a dig at sales, but we have so much heavy discounting that's happening within our industries. What's really, really happening is we're losing our renewal cycles. So this is some really fascinating data that we haven't revealed quite yet out into the public. But what you're looking at here is essentially along this y-axis, you're looking at the willingness to pay at renewal. So what that means is after a year contract, at that 13th month, when it's time to get that next yearly contract, and this is strictly B2B data, basically what is the willingness to pay for that particular product? And along the x-axis here, you're looking at what was the discount given on the initial contract. So essentially what you're seeing is that if you're getting a discount or giving away discounts of over 30%, which a lot of B2B enterprise companies are doing, you're completely ruining your brand and the value perception that's being received by that particular customer. And what's interesting about this as you continue to dig further is that the impact of all of this acquisition, of all of this density that's happening in the market, is that this whole concept of growth, this whole concept of acquisition has now become table stakes. So what I mean by that is all of the different tactics that Stelly's talking about, all the different tactics that all of the different speakers are going to talk about in terms of growth, you might think that those are revolutionary or fascinating, but those are just necessary at this point because the impact of acquisition has diminished considerably in this market. So what I mean by that is when we isolate the impacts of acquisition, monetization, and retention, and we check out, okay, if we improved one of those particular levers by 1%, what is the impact on the bottom line? Like, what can we expect? So if we improve your acquisition by about 1%, about 5 years ago, you could expect a boost of about 3% in your business. But unfortunately, because of all this density and everything that's happening, that's diminished by about 30%. So now the impact today is about 2% on your business. You're almost getting to a point where it's getting the amount of money or effort in, you're getting the same amount of money or effort out. Now, contrastly, when you look at something like monetization and retention, both of these in particular 5 years ago have 2 to 4x the impact of acquisition already. But they were a little bit harder, right? You didn't have a forcing function because you were just getting all of these new marketing channels, and it was something that was super, super interesting within your business. But today, that impact is accelerating. You're actually seeing that the impact of monetization and retention is far outweighing what's happening in acquisition. But as you remember, most of our time is being spent in the acquisition base. Now, this is okay again. If we're really, really good at understanding our customers, this is something that we can overcome. But unfortunately, what you'll find is that we're being really, really lazy with our customer development. So who here knows what customer development is? Yeah? Okay. Who knows what customer research is? Everyone? No? Okay. All this really means is talking to your customers and understanding those particular customers and utilizing those findings to build really, really good product and just a really, really good company. Now, what's fascinating is that if you read Paul Graham, if you read Y Combinator, if you read everything about success, it always talks about talking to the customer. The secret to building a really, really good product and building a really, really good business is talking to the customer. But unfortunately, when we go out and we talk to founders and executives at SaaS companies, most of us are not really talking to customers. We're talking to 10 or less customers on average per month in a non-sales capacity to learn from them. And what's interesting about this in particular is that a lot of folks will say, okay, well, we're not talking to customers, but we're doing a lot of experimentation. Well, it turns out we're not really doing that at all. Nearly half of us are doing 0 experiments per month. So we're not really talking to our customers to figure out what they need. We're not experimenting to kind of guess and check our way to success. And unfortunately, this is having a really, really dire consequence in how we're building product. So in order to illustrate this point, I'm going to basically introduce kind of a new model that we've come up with here, which really gets to the point of how you think about value. So if there's any MBAs in the room, they'll always appreciate a nice 2x2 here. But what's interesting is that when you think about value, so let's talk about a cup of coffee, for instance. There's actually 2 axes on which you can think about value. The first is the different attributes. So is it taste? Is it the temperature? Is it the color? Is it the country of origin of a cup of coffee? So we could actually survey this entire room using a good model, and we could figure out, overall, do we really, really care about this, or do we really, really care about that? And we can plot that on this x-axis here. Now, the other way that you can think about value is actually price, or price elasticity. So we can survey this entire room, and we can figure out, okay, what's the willingness to pay for a cup of coffee? And that's here on this y-axis. Now, when you combine these 2 pieces of data, it actually becomes really, really powerful for your business. So if we find something that is really, really well-liked from an attribute perspective, let's say taste, and the people who really, really care about taste are willing to pay more than the rest of the group, you, my friends, have a differentiable feature. That's something that you can charge more for. You can differentiate within your business. Now, if we find something that has low value, but has a high willingness to pay, so something like country of origin, that's an add-on. And then if we have something that has low willingness to pay, but really, really high value, that's a table stakes feature. It's a core feature that you need to build just to keep that particular customer. And then my personal favorite, trash land, when you have something that no one really likes and no one's really willing to pay for. Now, what's fascinating about this in particular is that when we go and talk to your product folks, and we asked about 5,000 different folks out there, and we said, take your last N features, take as many features as you want, and basically plot where you think your features are on this particular plot. This is what your product folks think they're building. They're very, very confident about it too. So we asked the confidence level to which they thought that these features landed in this particular spots, and most of them basically said, we're very, very confident. We're very, very confident we know what we're building. Now, what's fascinating is that we went to it was like 1.2 million of your customers. And we actually talked to them about your particular features, and we said, what's the willingness to pay, as well as what is the relative preference of those features. And as you might expect, this is what we're actually building. That's what we think we're building. That's what we're actually building. I could do this all day. It's fun. So what's interesting about this in particular is that there are really, really clear winners and losers in this environment. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. There's so many different density issues that are happening within our businesses. And while we're going over here, growth is going over there. And when you think about the winners and losers that are out there, it used to be in 2012, so just 5 years ago, when you looked at this darker green, which are folks that had minimal customer development, and you looked at the growth of those particular companies, they were growing about 30% year over year, which isn't bad. That's actually really, really good, especially for some of the larger companies out there. Those particular companies that were doing customer development, about 44% per year. So doing better, but in some cases not noticeably better enough to really force people into action. Now, when we look at today, you notice that gap is increasing even further. So most of you didn't know what customer development was. Most of you didn't know what customer research was. But that's really what's driving a ton of growth out there. It's just talking to your customers and understanding exactly what they want and then deciding if that's truly what needs to be built. That's the secret to a lot of this growth. And what's also interesting is when we look at these companies and we start to group them together about how they're growing, and we look at companies that are strictly acquisition-based, meaning the only numbers in their company that are improving are Are there actual conversion net leads, or they're actually conversion rate? And then their retention numbers and their monetization numbers aren't doing as well. When we compare those to companies where all three of those levers are improving, we actually find that's a very, very similar story. So those companies that are primarily acquisition focused are still growing, but that growth is diminishing. Again, because it's table stakes. So if they're only going to focus on acquisition, they'll still grow, but that growth is going to start diminishing, and they're not going to get the returns that's expected of being a high-growth SaaS company. So the reason that this should be so scary, and again, I did promise you I was different than Stelly. I was going to bring kind of the, not hyper, but a little bit more like, oh, this is bad, what do we do? But the reason that this should be so scary is that everything in your business is focused on these customers. And everything that you do, whether it's your sales and your marketing, or it's your finance team and your operations team, is used to drive a particular customer to a conversion point, or to justify the product or the price that you're putting on that particular page, or in that particular rate card, or in that particular sales conversation. So if you have no idea who these customers are, if you're only focused on just shoving as many leads down the throat of your funnel as you can, there's no way in hell that you're going to optimize this particular funnel, and there's no way in hell you're going to be able to grow. That's what's so scary about what's happening in the market, is that we continue just throwing as many things as we can against this particular page and just hoping as much as we can will stick, when in reality it's not going to matter anymore, because the Teflon nature of your customers is going to mean that they can quickly go somewhere else, or at the very least churn out of your particular business, because there's just thousands of other products out there that are demanding their attention and are demanding their time. So we're not focusing on the fundamentals, and that's something that's really, really scary because it doesn't work anymore. And what's fortunately really, really good about this, to make it a little bit more positive than simply saying you're going to be left behind if you don't focus on these things, is that we really, really have a good community around us. Not only in Europe through SaaS Doc, but we have a good community just in SaaS in general. There are a ton of people publishing all types of different things to overcome these different pieces in a business, but you as founders and you as executives simply need to focus on those fundamentals in particular, and making sure that you're just using the basics of building a really, really good business. Understanding your unit economics, utilizing that understanding to know what's not working, doing research on that thing that's not working, and then implementing some sort of a solution that solves for that particular cause. So make sure that you stop being a maverick. Make sure that you stop just, being a cowboy and running from the hip, as they say, and actually focus on your numbers and focus on your business. That's what's going to save you. And as I mentioned already, thankfully, there's a really, really good community of support. There's just a ton that's being published. There's also just so many free products out there to help you with a lot of the basics that are happening out there. And it's something that I think that we're really excited, because we kind of sit in the center of SaaS, because we strictly work with SaaS companies to continue to kind of help basically push other folks in different directions, and also be a nice little curator of a lot of what's going on. So if you ever have any doubt, or you've ever have any questions, we definitely will help you, but a simple Google search will probably help you out a lot as well. The other thing is, make sure you're helping one another. This is a really, really big thing that's been really successful for us in the States. We're based in Boston. And what we've found is that whenever we've had a problem, it's been something that was easily solved by finding an expert, something like Stelly in sales, Guillaume in marketing, a ton of other folks out there in different specialties, and make sure that you're helping one another, because that's the thing that's really going to make this industry and just this ecosystem stick. Now, for us today, to overcome some of these things, particularly around pricing and retention, we're also running some rogue workshops. This is something that we did really well last year that we really like to do. So we have a booth over in the sponsor section here. So we're actually going to be running a SaaS pricing workshop today at lunch, and then we're also running a retention workshop tomorrow at lunch as well. So basically, this is where I get to be Stelly and really get you pumped up and actually teach you how to actually solve some of these problems, rather than just making you feel bad around, oh no, there's a lot of change happening in the market. And what's also really, really cool, and this is something that some of you have asked already about our booth, is that actually we're giving away €1 million in-kind support and consulting around pricing as well as retention, and then also in access to our paid products. We're really, really excited to be in Europe in particular. mainly because it's so close to Boston, and also we've just loved getting to know a lot of folks just through different events in the past couple of years. And so if you want help with anything, we're giving away a lot, and my board thought we were absolutely insane to do this, and normally when they think it's insane, it's actually a pretty good idea, so we're pretty excited about it. So come on over, and all you have to do is ask for help. There's a lot of stuff that can be helped within your business. And if you want the slides, if you want any help, if you want any additional materials around these topics, just feel free to reach out. As most of you who I know in the audience know, I'm really, really quick to get back and basically get you in the direction of getting some help. But we still have a couple of minutes for questions, and so we'll stick around, and yeah, more than happy to help. I think there's a mic. Is there a mic? Oh, cool. Any questions? We can just stare at each other for a few. What are your most favorite resources for SaaS education? So Scott's blog at Matrix is really, really good. There's also a really, really good amount of stuff being done at OpenView Partners. They're based in Boston, but they go really, really deep. And then I don't really look at a lot of resources as like SaaS in particular. I think you need to find like the different verticalized knowledge that you need. So going to a sales blog and focusing on that, going to a marketing blog, a pricing blog, et cetera. Because I think a lot of the problems that we talked about are things that need more point solutions rather than more general solutions. Yeah. Oh, hey, what's up, man? Yeah.
Just a question there. The graph you had up, the one you were clicking back and forth.
Yeah.
So where would you say that, we'll say with a product that a company needs to that relative to product market fit, is that something that you almost need to be figuring out in an early stage to determine, well, actually, if we're trying to figure out product market fit, actually, do we need to know what the feature set in the top right corner?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I rephrase it, when do you need to figure out product market fit? Is that
and how early in the process of launching a new product do you actually need to do this? Should you have this done for the buyer personas up front, or is it something you do after launch? Or?
Totally. So typically what we recommend, so who in here is like super early stage? Anyone? Okay. Who in here is like growth stage, like 5 to 20 million? And then big dogs, over 20 million? A few. These are the folks you should buy, or get to buy drinks, by the way. Anyways, so I think it's one of those things where it's a constant battle. Like even in your earliest stage, you need to be collecting data on something, right? It doesn't need to be like as extensive as this. But from a perspective of like when you should be doing this, it's after you have that early traction, you really need some context of what this looks like in your business. Because oftentimes what ends up happening is you waste like sprints, quarters, months, years, basically building something that actually looks like this. And then you run into a point where your DNA of your company has kind of brute forced its growth to a particular point. And then the DNA is really, really hard to change when you have a lot of people. So it's less an issue with the product, because if we're just a couple of people and we realize, oh, we need to change directions completely based on this data, that's really easy for us to do because there's less friction. But when you're 50 people, 100 people, 200 people, 300 people, it's really, really hard to change the entire business when you already have all these legacy features that have been built. So to give you an actual number, I'd recommend typically like 3 million if you don't have any type of data like this in your business, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. You're going to be in trouble probably once you reach the 10 million mark. Before that, it's going to help you a lot. It's taken a lot of like time off of a lot of development for folks, but it's one of those things where you can brute force your way to that growth. It's a good question. Cool. Any other questions? Nothing? Did I make you all sleep? Is that what happened? No? All right, cool. Well, I'll be over in the booth areas. If you guys have any other questions, emails Patrick at priceintelligence.com. We're more than happy to help. Thanks, guys.